But the worst part? This wasn't the first time she had chosen to humiliate me. It was just the I'll never forget that night. The air was heavy with perfume, cologne, and the false laughter that always lingers at corporate gatherings. I thought it would be just another dull evening, handshakes, fake smiles, and my wife on my arm, looking stunning as always. For a moment I even felt proud. Proud that out of everyone in that room, she was with me. My wife, my partner, my supposed soulmate. And then it happened. My boss, the man who signed my paychecks, the man I'd worked years to impress, suddenly raised his glass. His eyes locked on mine before shifting to her, and with a grin that dripped arrogance, he pointed directly at my wife and declared, "Today, she's mine." The room froze. I thought surely this was some kind of bad joke, one of his tasteless stunts he was known for. I expected her to laugh it off, to roll her eyes, to grab my hand in solidarity. But she didn't. She smirked. That same smirk I once thought was playful now cut through me like a knife. And with a voice that didn't shake, didn't hesitate, she said, "I agree." Then, in front of everyone, she slipped her arm into his and walked out, just like that. No glance back, no explanation, no shame. I stood there, my world collapsing as whispers rippled through the room. I'll never forget that night. The air was heavy with perfume, cologne, and the false laughter that always lingers at corporate gatherings. I thought it would be just another dull evening, handshakes, fake smiles, and my wife on my arm, looking stunning as always. For a moment I even felt proud. Proud that out of everyone in that room, she was with me. My wife, my partner, my supposed soulmate. And then it happened. My boss, the man who signed my paychecks, the man I'd worked years to impress, suddenly raised his glass. His eyes locked on mine before shifting to her, and with a grin that dripped arrogance, he pointed directly at my wife and declared, "Today, she's mine." The room froze. I thought surely this was some kind of bad joke, one of his tasteless stunts he was known for. I expected her to laugh it off, to roll her eyes, to grab my hand in solidarity. But she didn't. She smirked. That same smirk I once thought was playful now cut through me like a knife. And with a voice that didn't shake, didn't hesitate, she said, "I agree." Then, in front of everyone, she slipped her arm into his and walked out, just like that. No glance back, no explanation, no shame. I stood there, my world collapsing as whispers rippled through the room. From the very beginning, I told myself I'd do whatever it took to make her happy. I worked long hours under my boss, taking on extra projects, sacrificing weekends, telling myself it was all for us, for the future we'd build together. She had dreams, big ones, of living in luxury, traveling the world, being admired. I wanted to give her the world, even if it meant putting my own desires on hold. But the cracks started showing early. I remember the first time she laughed at my job, calling it safe and boring. I brushed it off, telling myself she was just teasing. Then there was how she lit up whenever other men paid her attention, how she leaned a little too close, laughed a little too loudly. I told myself I was overthinking it. She started comparing me to others, men with nicer cars, louder personalities, bigger wallets. I was too predictable, she'd say. Too safe. Still, I clung to her. I convinced myself that real love meant patience, that loyalty would outshine the games she played. I thought I was building a life with my soulmate, but little did I know, I was just building a stage for my own humiliation. Final straw. At first, I told myself the little things didn't matter. A playful smile here, a lingering glance there, nothing worth wrecking our marriage over. But over time, those little things grew bolder, sharper, harder to ignore. At parties, she would drift from my side, gravitating toward whichever man had the loudest laugh or the thickest wallet. She'd toss her hair, touch their arms lightly, laugh at jokes that weren't even funny. When I tried to join the conversation, she'd wave me off like a child tugging at her sleeve. And if I dared to mention it later, she'd roll her eyes. "You're too sensitive. It's just harmless fun." But the truth was, the fun was always at my expense. In front of our friends, she started calling me too soft. She'd say it with a giggle, as though it were a compliment, but her eyes told a different story. "You're lucky I don't like bad boys, or I'd have left you already," she once joked at a barbecue, everyone laughing while I forced a smile. Inside, I felt myself shrinking. Then came the work events, those dreaded evenings where my personal and professional lives collided. My boss, arrogant and smug, always had a way of making crude jokes, especially when alcohol was involved. And she laughed at every one of them. Not just laughed, she leaned in, eyes sparkling, as though he was the most charming man alive. Meanwhile, I stood there invisible, the husband reduced to background noise. The late nights became routine. She'd stay out with friends, never inviting me, always vague about where she was. When I asked, she'd snap back, accusing me of being controlling, of not trusting her. She flipped the script so well that sometimes I actually wondered if I was the problem. Maybe I was boring. Maybe I was too safe. But then came the dinner, the night that still makes my stomach turn. It was a formal evening. Colleagues gathered around a long polished table, glasses clinking, laughter filling the air. Toward the end, my boss stood, raising his glass. He glanced at me briefly before turning to her, and with a grin that sent a chill through me, he said, "Here's to the most beautiful woman in the room, someone who deserves so much more than she has." The table erupted in chuckles, whispers, stolen glances. My face burned, but I looked to her, praying she'd shut it down, defend me, defend us. Instead, she blushed. She actually blushed. Her eyes lingered on him, her lips curling into a smile, as though he'd just paid her the greatest compliment she'd ever received. She tilted her glass toward him, silent approval that echoed louder than words. Everyone noticed. I saw the smirks, the awkward glances, the pity in some eyes and the amusement in others. And me? I sat frozen, every muscle tense, forcing myself to swallow the rage, the shame, the betrayal clawing inside me. I told myself to endure it, that making a scene would only make things worse. So I plastered on a smile that felt like shards of glass and raised my glass too, pretending I wasn't crumbling inside. I should have walked away that night, but I didn't, and that's why the final betrayal hit harder than anything I'd ever imagined. The night of the company gala, I told myself things would be different. I had rehearsed it in my mind 100 times. She'd stay by my side, she'd smile at me the way she used to, and maybe, just maybe, I'd finally feel like her husband instead of her shadow. I wore my best suit, polished my shoes until they shined, and walked into that ballroom with her on my arm, praying she'd remember that we were a team. First, it seemed normal. Champagne flowed, the orchestra played, conversations buzzed. She looked breathtaking in her dress, the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare. For a brief moment, I felt proud again. Proud to introduce her as my wife, proud to be seen with her. And then the moment came. The speeches began, one after another, until finally, my boss took the stage. He was already half drunk, his words slurring slightly, but his arrogance was sharper than ever. He scanned the crowd, his eyes settling on us. Then he raised his hand, pointed directly at her, and said the words that shattered my world. "Today she's mine." The room went silent. My ears rang with the weight of those 4 words. People turned to me, waiting for me to react, waiting for her to deny it, to laugh it off, to prove that this was just another one of his cruel jokes. But she didn't. She smirked. That same smirk I'd once fallen in love with twisted into something unrecognizable. And without missing a beat, she said, "I agree." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My colleagues, my peers, even friends I'd known for years, all of them watched as my wife slipped her arm into his and walked out of that ballroom with him. No hesitation, no shame, no glance back at the man she had promised forever to. I stood there, my heart pounding in my ears, my face burning as whispers spread like wildfire. Some people pitied me, their eyes soft with sympathy I didn't want. Others smirked, entertained by the public unraveling of my marriage. I had never felt so small, so exposed, so utterly destroyed. But here's the strange thing, I didn't explode. I didn't chase after them, didn't scream, didn't cause a scene. Instead, a calmness washed over me, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I left quietly, walking past the stairs, past the murmurs, past the judgment. On the outside, I was composed. On the inside, I was burning. That night, lying awake in an empty bed, I realized I had a choice. I could crumble under the weight of her betrayal, or I could use it. I chose the latter. I started small, paying attention to the details she thought I'd ignore. The late nights, the sudden interest in work functions, the secretive phone calls, it all made sense now. I went through our shared accounts, and the trail was obvious. Hotel bookings, credit card charges, even rideshare receipts that lined up perfectly with his schedule. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. Worse yet, I discovered they were using company resources, his position of power, his expense accounts, his influence to fund their little escapades. Business trips that weren't business at all. Client meetings that were nothing more than rented hotel rooms. It was all there, black and white, undeniable. Each piece of evidence fueled me. Each receipt, each email, each whisper of proof stacked higher and higher, until I wasn't just a betrayed husband anymore. I was a man with a plan. They thought they had destroyed me, but they had no idea what kind of fire they had just lit inside me. It didn't take long for the whispers from that gala to spread like wildfire. By Monday morning, the entire office knew. My phone buzzed constantly with colleagues checking in, some offering pity, others outrage. For once, they weren't laughing at me. They were furious at him, furious that a man in power would humiliate one of his own employees so openly. The office that once felt suffocating with shame suddenly shifted. People started approaching me quietly, sharing stories of his arrogance, his misuse of authority, the way he flaunted his conquests. My humiliation had cracked open a dam, and now everyone was eager to talk. Friends and family weren't any kinder to her. My mother's voice shook with anger when she called, demanding to know how she could throw away a marriage for a moment of vanity. My closest friends, men who had stood by me for years, said things I didn't want to hear but needed to. She didn't love you, man. She loved the attention. And in my mind, I could already see the Reddit comments if I had shared my story online. OP, your wife chose status over loyalty. That boss deserves to be exposed and fired. Please tell me you didn't stay with her after that. Each imagined comment felt like validation, like strangers on the internet could see what I had been blind to. I didn't stay silent for long. With every shred of evidence I had collected, I filed a detailed report with HR. Emails, receipts, photos, it was airtight. They couldn't sweep this one under the rug. An internal investigation launched, and the higher-ups didn't like what they found. The man who thought he was untouchable suddenly looked very small under the weight of scrutiny. His credibility collapsed, his position shaken, and whispers turned into full-blown demands for his resignation. As for her, the fantasy didn't last. The boss she thought would be her ticket to status and luxury dropped her as soon as the heat turned up. She went from flaunting her arrogance to facing ridicule everywhere she turned. Friends distanced themselves, family avoided her, and she began to realize that she had traded respect for nothing more than temporary tension. And that's when she came crawling back, tearful, desperate, saying she had made a mistake, that she wanted to fix things, that she still loved me. But by then, the man she once mocked as too soft wasn't soft anymore. And when she finally came crawling back, begging for forgiveness, I gave her just one answer. When she came back, I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't even raise my voice. I let her speak, let her pour out excuses wrapped in trembling apologies, let her beg me to believe that it had all been a mistake. She swore she loved me, that she'd been blinded, that she wanted to fix us. But I saw her for what she was, someone who only remembered my worth once her shiny fantasy had fallen apart. I looked her in the eyes, and with a calmness that surprised even me, I said, "You made your choice. Now live with it." That was the last time we spoke as husband and wife. The divorce was swift, almost merciful. She tried to fight for sympathy, but there was none left. Friends, family, colleagues, they all knew the truth. Her reputation crumbled just as quickly as his career. And me? I walked away lighter than I'd ever felt. I focused on myself. I poured energy back into my work, not to prove anything to anyone, but because I finally understood the value of self-respect. I reconnected with family and friends I had neglected, people who had loved me without conditions. Slowly, the fog of betrayal lifted, and I saw clearly, loyalty without boundaries isn't love, it's self-destruction. Respect is non-negotiable. No amount of beauty, charm, or history can make up for someone who doesn't value you. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's control, it's convenience, it's poison dressed up as passion. So I made myself a promise. Never again will I sacrifice my worth just to keep someone by my side. Never again will I beg for love or loyalty that should have been freely given. So to anyone listening, never beg for loyalty. If they don't see your worth, show them the door. Because real strength isn't in holding on, it's in walking away.